Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoy video. Ryan and Jonas back again with a faction focus the day of. We have today the KO video, obviously, and we're going to try to keep these things coming out as fast as we can for you guys. Some days it just won't happen, but if it has to be just one of us, that can be the case as well. Jonas, how are you doing today? What you think about the KO stuff?
I'm excited to talk about this one. KO is probably the army that I've played against the most this edition, so I'm very eager to talk about the changes.
Okay. Oh, I'm curious about that. Before we get into it, guys, just thanks again for all your viewership and keep the comments, likes, shares, and subscribes coming and keep the conversation going in the Discord. Thanks a lot for all that you already do for us. Okay, let's get on to those battle traits.
Yeah.
Okay, so talking about what this used to be, we could go into a lot of detail.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of like Stormcast, the first two in the left-hand column there are basically one ability, and it's actually very similar to Stormcast because it's a setting something in deep strike basically in reserve and then letting it come back down.
Yeah.
That's the first one, and the second one. One important thing you're going to want to note here is that the first one is only once per battle. So unless we have a formation that says you can do this twice per battle instead with two different units, you're only putting one boat and with its respective amount of transport capacity inside as a deep strike. Now, we never had a deep strike in KO before, but as you can see from the name of this ability, Flying High, which is almost identical to Fly High, it's basically kind of replacing the teleport rule, kinda, in the sense that it's letting you actually drop outside of 9 inches. If you look at the second box there in your movement phase. And then all of the units that come outside the boat with it have to be wholly within 6. We're going to see this wholly within 6 as the new embark, disembark kind of replacement that we used to have on of the boats.
You
That whole
dropped you
system,
dropped off there. That you used to have.
we used to have a disembark embark system where you would have to step inside or
Yeah.
out of the boat, and that
Yeah.
was wholly within 3 inches. Now it's been doubled to 6.
Hmm.
The whole system's been changed quite a bit, guys. So you're no longer putting your models in the boat as if they were garrisoned. This is actually something we could have seen coming. The writing was on the wall with the Dawnbringer Crusades, a Grunstock Expeditionary Force, which I never really used. I actually had to look up the rules for, where you basically could only bring gun haulers, any number of heroes, and then Thunderers. And basically, instead of putting the Thunderers in the gun haulers, which typically didn't have transport capacity anyway, unless you took the mount trait, they did something like what we're about to see. So the writing was kind of on the wall that we're not going to have guys in the boat anymore. Now, while we're talking about that, let's go back to that first ability there in the upper left hand corner that basically is talking about transport capacity. So, Jonas, maybe you could scroll down to the frigate real quick and we can take a look at just the frigate for right now, its transport capacity rule.
Yeah.
So, the passive ability on this frigate says this unit can transport up to two friendly Kharadron Overlords infantry units with a combined model count of up to 12. Now, what this means is, first off, infantry does include the balloon boys, so that it's not limited to just little guys that aren't flying. They don't count as cavalry, so that's good. It's basically just replacing the Skyfarer keyword, kind of in this sense. So you're not taking gun haulers with you inside the boat, which makes total sense. But now you're stuck to two units in this frigate, and with a combined model count of up to 12, which is always the cap on a frigate. But this is really limiting what you can do, considering like this means you could take a unit of 10 Arco and then one hero, so you can't fill it up to 12. You could take a two reinforced units of balloon guys, so that'll be 6 and 6. But then you don't have room. You never had room for a hero, so that's the same as it always was before. You could take one single reinforced, because there is no double reinforced unit of balloon boys for 6, and then take one hero, so then you're only hitting 7 out of the 12. You could take, at worst, I guess, two heroes.
Yeah.
which you have 10 left over. And by the way, reinforcing a unit of Thunderers to just 10 because they can't go to 15 anymore, would it be the same as the Arco? So 10 Thunderers plus 1 hero.
Yeah.
What are you thinking about this change for the capacity?
This is really harsh. The capacity is something that really kills a lot of the joy about the other changes for me, because personally I do feel that the battle traits have been changed for the better of the game. But this is really a big nerf to the transporting capacity, and you're already nerfing the way the units are getting transported. So this is quite harsh, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a version of this army where you take more balloon guys because they're already about as fast as the boats. They are as fast as the boats at
Yeah.
12 inches. And you take them to not be in the boats unless you modularly just choose to put them in every once in a while.
Yeah,
It could
and
also, yeah,
we haven't really seen any of the regular heroes yet, so they might actually have an ability that they don't count towards your transport capacity or something like that.
true, that's fair. Or, yeah, that would be good. But not the problem with having just a MSU of heroes, lots of heroes, is I don't know if you're going to have enough boats to move them around.
Exactly. Yeah.
You could take more gun haulers, which will, I guess, be cheaper. But traditionally, no one was really taking that many gun haulers unless they leaned into that Grunstock
Yeah.
expedition,
Yeah.
of course. So, anyway, this is how it works now. So let's scroll
Okay, let's
back up to
scroll back
the top.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we've got the one deep strike. I guess that's kind of interesting. I'll go ahead and tell you there's no sign of boat commands anymore. So you're not going to have disengage where you retreat with your boat and then everyone in can shoot as well as the boat. And we have no, maybe that's on a war scroll somewhere, but we don't see that anymore. And you don't have combat landing where you step out for a CP, but that's kind of been replaced by what we're about to look at next, because
Yeah.
it's one in the upper right hand corner is kind of combined with what we always had with transporting. So, how it works if you transport. As a reaction to your sky vessel, so one of the three boats making a non charge movability, and this could be anytime, this could be as a redeploy because it's just a movability.
Hmm.
It doesn't say it has to be in your turn. It could be as, well, I guess not as a counter charge because it is a charge ability, right? So, anyway, you pick a number of units equal to the transport capacity, wholly within 6 inches, so that we just described what that could be. And those, units that have been transported this turn can't be targeted. So you can't kind of do a daisy chain of transporting people. And then you basically just take those models off the battlefield, you move the sky vessel, and then you set up each one of those units wholly within 6 inches of the sky vessel, but outside of combat, which would be 3 inches. So not outside of 9, which is interesting.
Hmm.
And then they count as being transported, but cannot use charge abilities at all if they were transported in the same turn. So let's think about how this might play out. Let's say you've got a unit of balloon boys that were nowhere near a boat, and they go and make a 12-inch move plus like an auto run, so 18-inch move, so that they're within 6 inches of a boat, but just barely within 6 inches. So they're 18 inches, and they step in the boat, and the boat does the same thing. It makes a run, and then so the boat's going like 12 inches plus 6 inches, or let's say you roll I don't know, a 3 or 4, so 15 inches. Then you can step out on the other side of the boat, wholly within 6, just outside of 3. Granted, you guys ran, so you can't shoot that turn, but you could imagine just adding up the numbers I just said there. It's actually almost a teleport. So, in the sense that we have guys sitting in the boat, that's gone, and they're being protected. We have kind of the next ability below this will kind of cover that. But that's kind of gone. And then you've also got the teleports gone, except for the deep strike, I guess. But if you line things up right, your units can actually go quite far across the board. Let's say you didn't run. It's still 12 inches for those guys, plus the 6-inch step in range, plus the boat's normal 12-inch move, and then a 6-inch step out range. And then you can still shoot. You just can't charge. So it's actually pretty far. It's just we have a limitation to how many units you can transport like this. We don't know yet what the Ironclad's transport capacity is. I'm hoping it can take like 4 units instead of just 3.
Yeah.
But we'll see. What are you thinking about this?
And well, Ryan, I'm not sure whether you picked up on this, but you can actually also use this to take your guys out of combat.
Okay.
Because it doesn't really specify that your unit can't be in combat. So you could actually, if the unit managed to be wholly within 6 inches and your boat isn't in combat, or even if it is, it doesn't really matter. You could either just move the boat back or retreat it and take D3 mortal wounds on your boat. But then the units that were transported are outside of combat now. They didn't do a retreat move to get there, so they could actually still just shoot and do all of those other things that don't count as that wouldn't trigger if you had retreated or made a move. So it's actually quite potent on Thunderers, for example. If you place your Sky Vessel right behind them and outside of combat, you could just really take him out there without any repercussions.
That's an amazing point. I've been, trying to catch up on this after a work day.
Yeah, you had very little time, but yeah, that's why we're doing it with the both of us, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean, that's great. That basically is the disengage rule. And the boat could be in combat itself, right? Because it doesn't say, it just says a non-charge move. So the boat would count as retreated, but the guys would.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay.
It's
all right.
Good. The thing is, these rules, they look kind of flat and boring and weak. But if I keep reading this and I keep thinking about different ways that you could use this, just us talking about this for 5 minutes, and we already have 3 different ways of using this. And I bet there's going to be so many times in your games where you can really show off your tactical acumen by really getting the most out of this ability. I cannot stress enough how much I enjoy this change, because I love the fact that the units are outside of the boat now, so you can actually, as an opponent, see what units are in there. I really hated asking my opponent, like, what boat is that? What boat is that? I mean, my regular opponent didn't even have 10 Thunderers because he never took them out.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? And that's great from a economical point of view. And I love that he was able to play with his army that quickly, because he only had to get 5 to get started, honestly. But I just really like the fact that we can now see them, we can charge them, we can interact with all of these models without pretending that they're in there somewhere. I also really like that they don't get the +1 to save anymore, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Well, let's just cover it now. It's -1 from hit only against shooting attacks. This is the ability in the bottom, but anytime they're standing holier than 6. So it's nice that they have something, but it's not, changing the world, right? They always had I guess they always had -1 to hit, right? So, but that was from melee as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't remember that. Yeah.
It's
anyway,
a huge nerve, but I like it overall.
Yeah, and holier than 6 is relatively generous, especially if you're used to the embark disembark range of the boats being holier than 3. So as circles work and surface area inside the circle, it actually gets quite much a lot bigger when it goes from 3 to 6. It's not just double. So I really am glad you mentioned that about the movement rule, because there's probably a lot of certain circumstances I'm not thinking about because I never played the Dawnbringers version of this army. I'm sure those players are all totally on board with this. So my excuses to my apologies to the KO players out there that already knew all about that. But anyway, it's 6 inches instead of 3 now, which is one of the big, I guess you could call it a buff since the Grunstock Expeditionary Force version.
Yeah, and the fact that KO have as many small heroes as they already do, I can only imagine that there's at least going to be one hero that interacts with this rule and enables like a double move or something, and then things are really getting weird and quirky, and back to the teleporting all over the boards. While it's not actually a teleport anymore, you still get the movement to almost make it feel like a teleport, as you mentioned. So if you're down on these rules, just wait it out a little bit. I imagine you're going to get some return investment from this rule.
Yeah. Also worth pointing out, having the guys on the field means they're on the field, so they count towards holding objectives now. Yeah. So that's good. Important to mention, we lost the code, evidently. So I really liked that part.
Yeah, that's really a loss of flavor, right?
Yeah. And we might have lost mount traits for the boats. We don't know. Maybe they're unique enhancements still, but right now we have no indication that they still exist. So, but ultimately, you've convinced me on this. I wasn't even that down about it, honestly. It's just a different style. I kind of liked having my guys in the boat, honestly.
Yeah. Really, the only downside that I could see for both sides is it's going to take such a long time to move your ships now. Because you're gonna have to measure, are all my units only within 6s? Okay, within 6. Okay, I move the ship. Then I have to move all of my units within 6 again, measure it again to check whether they're all wholly within 6 inches. And as you mentioned, you could also do this on a redeploy. So how many times are you going to do this in a battle round? Quite often, I imagine.
Yeah, but 6 is a lot more forgiving than 3.
Yeah,
So if you're just nitpicking on 6, I
yeah.
think it'll be easier.
Well, it's gonna matter when when you're when you're moving about and you want your guns to be in range, and some of your guns are quite short range already. We'll get to that in a minute, but I think it'll matter for the Thunderers.
I agree with you. It's just we're all used to doing it already,
Yeah,
all of us.
that's fair. That's fair.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So
Okay.
battle formations. This is the
Man.
first time we've seen something like this.
Mm-hmm.
The Engineers Guild Expeditionary Force is basically during deployment once per game you get to pick a non-unique KO hero that doesn't currently have an artifact, and then you get to choose which one you're going to give him. So you basically have 2 different artifacts in the army, and one of them, of course, is in your list, but the other one is chosen after you've seen your opponent's army. So maybe we go to the artifacts and then discuss.
Yeah.
I like how they did a strike through on the Arcana and
Yeah,
Invocations
that was a
above.
nice touch.
Um, oh, and one other thing that was worth mentioning that I forgot about earlier, they kind of snuck this in, but before the battle trace, they even said that there's a core rule now that says that units that are set up outside of deployment phases, the deployment phase can't make move actions during the movement phase of the turn they come into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes the models that get dropped off here. So that's something that hadn't been said yet, and that's just a core rule. So if you deep strike, no moving, it's just hard baked into the rule. Okay, so artifacts. We basically took 3. I don't know if these are the best 3, but I can tell you one of these really sounds a lot better to me than it used to.
Yeah,
I don't know if you know which direction I'm going here, but
I
all of them are
do.
once per battle, which is a little bit of a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of them is once per battle, any shooting or combat phase, you pick an enemy monster within 12 inches, and it goes off automatically. It used to trigger on a roll, if I'm not mistaken, yes, on a 2+. And until the start of your next turn, subtract 1 from the number of dice rolled when making charge rolls for the target. Now, it used to say until the end of your opponent's next turn, which means if you take a double turn, it goes to it's wasted, except unless they want to make a counter charge. But say you know they don't have enough CP, you just wouldn't do this. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
you wait till your next turn to pull it off. So if you're not sure whether you're going to take a turn the next turn, or you know that they've got 2 different juicy countercharge options with monsters, I guess maybe this is a little less effective than it used to be, but it goes off automatically. I don't know. What do you think? Do you
It's
think
fine.
you would like
It's
this?
fine. I just hate that it's once per battle. But it would be way too strong if it wasn't. So
Yeah, before it wasn't once per battle, so that's worth noting. So now it goes off automatically, which is a change that I'm happy to see. If you're going to make it once per battle, please don't make it reliant on a roll as well.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I want to skip the one I really want to talk about. Let's go to Voidstone Orb because it's identical to what it used to be.
Uh-huh.
This used to have to be taken by a navigator, so now it's free choice, and you can choose to unbind auto unbind a spell. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it could be in your opponent's or in your turn when an opponent doesn't unleash spell, because it just says when they declare a spell ability. But the important one here is Celestial Burst Grenade.
Yeah.
Once per battle, which it always was, your shooting phase, that's the same. Enemy unit within 12, the same. But it used to say ward rolls cannot be made for the target for the rest of the phase, meaning the shooting phase. But now it's the rest of the turn. So KO melee builds are rejoicing here because now they get to benefit from the same, very swingy thing that can
Yep.
change the tide of the battle. And if some units are really relying on that ward, this is a very strong ability, turning it off for the whole rest of the turn. What you thinking?
Yeah, it's so good. I honestly, I cannot imagine you not bringing this compared to the other 2 that we're seeing right now.
Agreed.
Voidstone
And
is also pretty decent because sometimes you would, as a Stormcast player, you would sometimes bring the not the Knight Arcana, but the other one, the Knight Incantor, just to get the auto unbind. So that's nice. But Celestian Burst Grenade, man, it's gonna be in there every time.
I think so. And obviously, if you take that one sub faction, their formation, then you can flexibly say, is there a monster? I'll take this or not.
Yeah.
But it's also worth pointing out, I missed this. Celestial Burst Grenade used to go off on a 2+, so now it's guaranteed.
That's what I was gonna say. I was like, I had not picked up that it was on the rest of the turn. I had only picked up that there was no roll required, which I thought was a nice change. But the rest of the turn is especially nice,
Yeah.
which is good
Okay.
because it always felt bad, that you couldn't really take it if you didn't want to go to the Thunder build.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, Uh, yeah. I I just think this is a really big boost.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously we lost a couple other artifacts. I don't know how many of them were super necessary. Spell in the bottle evidently is gone.
Yeah.
So that's weird, I guess. And phosphorite bomblets, the injured master one that could do unlimited mortal wounds as long as you keep rolling a 2+ was kind of fun, but evidently that's not in here.
Hmm.
Okay. In the interest of time, let's look at Brock.
Yeah. Man,
So
don't you just wish that Talia would have looked slightly like this?
I mean, his profile is basically this. I mean, it did get toned down for what it's worth. Everything got toned down or stayed the same.
Hmm.
Um, so, like, his main weapon has the exact same profile it once had. His shooting combat weapon does have shooting combat, but of course, we used to be able to do that and lost 6 inches of range. Um, his saw, I feel like he used to have a wounding on twos, so but he got +1 attack.
Hmm.
So it kind of is more or less the same. But he can't give himself. So if we look at his any combat phase rule, this is a big one. And he used to only be fixed to Bark Nar, and now, of course, that doesn't exist. So he's just doing this to any target Skyfarer unit. But himself, he can't do himself, and he used to create a bubble, so that obviously, like was himself included. Now he's picking two other Skyfarer units to get +1 attacks. But it used to be on the charge only. So there's like a side grade here, depending on how many units you're sending in with him, and they have to be in the combat range of him. So it used to be, I think, a 12-inch bubble, and so now they have to be within 3 inch of him. So he has to go in with them and be in combat. But it could be used every single combat phase. So that's pretty amazing. There's definitely a buff for certain units, though. If I'm not mistaken, the Sky Wardens that we saw lost an attack, so it's just putting them back to their old attacks characteristic.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a side grade there. And then his once per battle, your movement phase. This used to be a command ability, so now it's just a once per battle free thing that goes off without blowing a CP. You can pick up to 3 visible, didn't used to be visible, friendly sky vessels holier than 24 that are not in combat to be the target, and each target can use a run ability and use shoot and or charge. This interacts a bit weird with the frigate's ability that we're about to see, because I'm pretty sure you can't use this with Brock. Um, the salt boat thing where
Yeah.
they charge and you get
No,
first strike
yeah, it cancels each other out. So I mean, you're not allowed to do it at least.
for
Yeah.
the charge part, but
Yeah, the charge part. Yeah.
you can use the shoot part.
Hmm.
And then his end of turn mustache thing. Now this used to go off in after right after he fought, so it's gotten a little worse. And then it does an amount of mortal damage equal to the roll. I still need to see what the ruling is on this D3 terminology they're using here. You and Siegfried talked about it a bit.
Yeah.
It's still not clear to me. I wish they just really quickly mentioned it in an article somewhere. But anyway, yeah, you roll 2+ and do that much mortal damage. So, um, he's fine. He definitely does stuff. It really depends again on his points, and most of these abilities got kind of nerfed or side graded. So, I mean, you said you thought this was pretty good, though, right?
Yeah, the thing that I think is good about this guy is that it's probably going to be very affordable, and he's good enough. His stats are fine. He has a very interesting rule. The first rule of Grungson is really strong if you're on a melee list, and if you compare it to Talia, who we reviewed yesterday for the Cities of Sigmar, she has all these weird rules that are kind of strange and not as effective, and it just feels kind of contrary to what you want to do. Well, this guy at least promotes proactive gameplay. You get to use your extra attack on any combat phase. So whether it's yours of your opponent's, you have the end of any turn for the mustache mounted aether blaster. So it's not only when you're getting charged or something like that. So I do feel like it is probably going to be more affordable than Talia, obviously, and he's going to be able to be included in more lists that way. And he'll always do something for you, while with Talia, I don't have that feeling at all.
Yeah, I mean the fact that he's not faction locked anymore to use his best ability,
Yeah,
which was the +1 attack,
yeah,
that's pretty good.
yeah.
So Also, fun fact: his Magnate's Charter, the one that can shoot in combat, even though it lost range, it's now identical to what it used to be like for a gun hauler to use its. I think I've got this right. It's close up. Yes, it's carbines plus its shrapnel, the 12-inch version of its flexible shot. It's got the exact same profile. So he's basically like a gun hauler with that one shooting combat profile. Plus, he's got the one above. So that's always been the case, but it's kind of a fun thing that I like to think about this guy. He's a little mini gun hauler.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the frigate. This had a big change in the 3.0 book because it went from being just a smaller ironclad to being a unit that had a distinct role to play in that it had a melee kind of focus. Now, I guess I'll talk about that while we're here. We already talked about his transport capacity. So let's look at the assault boat rule. This is a core move charge kind of thing you do only in your charge phase, so no counter charges here. Now, you can only use this ability if it's not in combat. Okay, fine. And it hasn't used a run or retreat ability this turn. So you're not combining that if the boat made a run or retreat with the Brock's rule, I guess. You pick a number of units up to its transport capacity, holding in 6. This is exactly what we do. Then you make a charge roll. Now, I'm assuming that you make a charge roll and then you check to see if you can successfully make that charge, because the effect says remove the targets, as in the 2 units that it's going to take with it, from the battlefield, and then you can make a move up to the distance value. The charge roll must end within a half inch. But what if you can't? Then all of a sudden, it has no word text for what you have to do. Like with those units that you pulled off the battlefield, can you just set them up anywhere you like? I'm assuming there's some core rules clause here that says you have to first check to see if that charge is even possible before you resolve the effect of this ability. But that's getting into the weeds of it. Maybe it just needs an FAQ. And then basically you set up the 2 units you pulled up wholly within combat range. So now it is back to being the old version of disembarking 3 inches. They can be set up in combat, but don't have to be, which is new, I think. And they gain strike first for the rest of the turn and count as having charged. This ability used to also do mortal wound impact hits, so that's gone. And then how exactly this combines with your other transport abilities, I've still got to wrap my head around a bit. Have you thought about the combos of what this works with and doesn't work with?
Not really, but to answer your question from earlier, like how this would interact if you can't finish your charge or can't actually do your charge with a frigate, you would, as per rules as written here, you would still be allowed to set up your target unit again. So you could potentially rearrange the models that you've selected, and then they will also get strike first, whether that you completed that charge or not, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I
So
suppose.
if you get countercharged for that against that unit, they would at least strike first. And I know it's not a big thing, but it would allow you, if you see your opponents, maneuvering to get a countercharge on you, it would still allow you to rearrange your unit and, let's say, move a hero back to the back of your balloon boys, for example, and give the balloon boys and that hero strike first, so to ward off any potential counterchargers.
Yeah. Yeah, rules is written. I agree with you. I don't know if that's the intent of this rule.
It definitely isn't, but rule is written. It's what it's doing right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So quickly looking at Brock's rule and how that would combine, it's each target. So you pick a sky vessel, it can run and shoot or charge. Yeah. So what is this saying? It's saying it can't use this ability if it made a run. So then you're not doing that. Okay. I guess the question then is, could the other units that it's moving count as charge? Because it gives it the charge status back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's say that other unit had run to get in range of the boat. They jump in the boat. It makes a charge. It steps out, and then it says the unit counts as having charge. That would be in line with how it was played out in the 3rd edition book. So
I imagine that'll be allowed. I don't think you can do the boat with Brock's ability, but you can definitely do the unit that you're selecting with the assault boat.
Yeah. Okay. So looking at its profile, it's got the same wheel as it did before, including control value, because that was written somewhere else on the war scroll. The carbines, the close range shots are now getting bracketed, which they never used to, but they can shoot in combat. Same profile. Interestingly, you still choose between the sky cannon and the sky hook, but
Yeah.
the sky cannon no longer lets you choose between a long range shot and a short range shot,
Hmm.
which was the short range was identical to the carbines. It's just different attacks. It's now just making you do the long range shot, which actually got nerfed because it used to be D3+2.
Yeah.
So that's a little. I don't get it because the boats. Everyone knows the boats don't do that much work anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe they're trying to make the boats cheaper so you can like take more boats so you can teleport the guys around more.
Hmm.
I don't know, but that's kind of a weird nerf. And then the skyhook is now. I think it used to might. Well, it might have done 6 flat damage. Let me check that real quick. The skyhook.
No, I think it was D6.
It would. Yeah, I mean against a monster.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
flat 6 if it was against a
Yeah.
monster,
Yeah.
and now against a monster just +1 rend,
Hmm.
which is definitely a nerf.
Yeah.
And it also used to make it possible on a 4-up that monster would not be able to do rampages,
Yeah.
but that was who cares. The boarding weapons went up by 2 attacks, but again, not really good, and it no
Woohoo!
longer. And it still does the same bombs, and they don't bracket, so
Hmm.
that's good. Okay, let's move on in the interest of time.
Yeah. Because we're really
Sky
tight for
Warden.
time this time
Yeah,
around. Yeah.
yeah. Sky Wardens. Um, not too much has changed here, other than that you'll see this with the Thunderers too, that they simplified their weapons a little bit.
Hmm.
Like the basic weapon is the Vulcanizer pistol combined with the Sky Pikes, and that was the melee build that you would do. The pistol lost 2 inches of range and can shoot in combat, which is great. Uh, and then the Sky Pike lost an attack, but now does crit mortals, so it's doing 2 damage on 6s to hit, which is making up for some of the output. It really depends on what kind of save value your target had, whether the old profile was better or worse than this one. And then, honestly, the other 2 weapons got a little bit better. I guess you got exploding hits on the volley gun, but otherwise, I think it's the same profile. And then the heavy weapon you'll see used to be a combo of different things. I think it was like a drill launcher and either cannon and sorry, not either cannon, ethermatic volley gun and grapnel launcher. Sorry, correction. There is an ethermatic volley gun. It was grapnel launcher, skyhook, or drill launcher, and those all got kind of folded into one with the same range, and their profiles got kind of melded here. I never really took these weapons for what it's worth, but if I had to have taken one, I would have taken the grapnel launcher because it used to give you a free movement shenanigan once per
Yeah,
game.
that was cool.
That was really cool and flavorful. And if anyone ever on Facebook said like, "Hey, how should I arm these guys?" I'd say if you're not going to take a pure melee build, then take one grapnel launcher per unit just so that you have that extra ability. And
Yeah.
it's kind of weird that they took that away. But I don't know. What are you thinking about the weapons options?
I'm happy they condensed a lot of weapons options into one profile because it was too much for a typical Age of Sigmar army, you know? It almost felt like a Horus Heresy or 40k army build where you had all these different profiles and it was really overwhelming for an opponent. And to be honest, if you were new to KO or even if you weren't, it was just so much work to check out all of your profiles. So I think like 3 profiles is already quite a lot for one unit. So I'm happy they condensed that. I do kind of feel bad for everyone that liked that kind of ability to change, to swap around the abilities of that unit. And I thought the grapnel launcher was such a interesting and signature-esque ability that I really feel bad that they don't have that anymore, because that was just so flavorful in my mind. It looked totally awesome, like very Attack on Titan-y.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm curious to see what they do with the Indran riggers because they were always the healing variant of this. But
Yeah.
I'd like to see a little more distinction between the 2 units. Obviously, one of the big things we haven't talked about is the time charges. It's the same thing. It's at the end of the turn. It used to be into the combat, and then you roll D3 on a 2+. Now you do an amount of mortal damage equal to that, which is basically what it used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can immediately use a retreat ability. I think you had to make a retreat before. As if it were your movement phase, and you don't suffer mortal damage for doing so.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Also worth pointing out that considering not taking damage, boat's ability to retreat guys out of combat, they wouldn't count as retreating and therefore wouldn't take the mortal damage,
Yeah.
what you were talking about before. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this is definitely a cool rule to use to go grab an objective somewhere at the
Yeah.
end of the turn and send them in a different direction.
Yeah, I wonder what they're gonna do with the points cost for these kind of units, because these kind of units always used to be your cavalry replacement, I suppose. But now that every cavalry unit has gained a health,
Yeah.
and you guys haven't, or the Skywardens haven't, I do wonder whether their points are gonna stagnate and the cavalry points are gonna go up. We'll see.
I do have a feeling that all the Squig riders are going to have a similar situation because they're also on 32 mils like these
Yep.
are
Yep.
instead of the cavalry bases. So
Yeah, maybe yeah,
let's
maybe it's base size. Yeah.
let's take a look at the
Yeah,
Thunderers.
the big boys.
So Thunderers surprisingly didn't have their save nerfed. I kind of expected they would
Yeah,
have their
same.
save go down, but considering they're not going to be in a boat as much because there is no being in a boat anymore,
Mm-hmm.
they're not getting a +1 to save, which was one of the reasons it was so hard to kill them before. And they used to be able to redeploy back into a boat.
Yeah.
So I guess you would say the big thing that's changed about these guys is now it's 2 out of 5 models can be any combination of the fumigators and deck sweepers, or then again for the mortars and ether cannons, which got lumped into a kind of combined profile. And the way they did this was based off of their previous rules range and not based off of their previous rules function. And what I mean by that is the deck sweeper always had 5 attacks, but so did the Grunstock mortar as long as you targeted a unit that had 5 or more models. And so they actually had very similar comparable profiles. You could have just rolled them all together. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't lump those together and do something different with the range. So now they kept the range, but the fumigator used to hit like have auto hits and then could do mortal wounds in combat. That's gone, both sides of that. It did have D6 attacks, so now it's got 5 attacks instead, which is an upgrade on average.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the hit and wound rolls here have been moved around. In general, things have gotten nerfed a bit. Obviously, the fumigator and deck sweeper can shoot in combat, which is great. That's, I guess, in some weird way, kind of making up for the fumigator not doing its combat stuff anymore, considering most guns in the game can't shoot in combat. And they've got +1 rend against infantry, which is a good chunk of the units in the game. So, I mean, that's nice. But the cannon got nerfed pretty hard. I mean, it got double attacks, but it lost what made it so. It was the big punchy thing you had in the unit, which was hitting on threes and it was hitting on. I think that is right, threes and twos, -2, 3, and now we've got double damage, but for -1 from each of its things, including the rend, and then a variable damage of D3 instead of 3. And I don't know. I don't know if this unit is doing what it used to do, which is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. You
Yeah.
know, it can shoot in combat as long as this is the ability down below, as long as it made a move or been set up this turn, which I think is pretty good. I mean that because you're taking this unit not for its combat ability, but for being tanky and having good shooting, and so it can kind of be your tanky unit because the Skywardens and Engine Riggers certainly aren't that can kind of sit there, stand in combat, and then try to like blast the guys to smithereens or whatever. I'm really curious to see how the Ether Chemist is going to interact with these guys because that was always the 1-2 punch of
Yeah.
him giving them more rend. And if he still gives them more rend, then we're getting back to where we used to be. Especially considering these guys will always be outside of the boat, which was the prerequisite for him giving that ability before. So I think it's going to depend a lot on how the rest of the complementary synergistic rules work with this unit. What are you thinking?
Yeah, overall, I feel that they've stagnated a little bit, especially if you know that they were such an outlier in power terms. They were so strong. They were such a Death Star E unit in and of themselves. I do really wonder what they're going to do with them now because sure, I mean, even though their damage has been nerfed a little bit, I do still think that the profiling itself is in broad strokes the same, but obviously you're going to lose out on a lot of synergy here because if you're transporting these guys, you're only bringing one hero max, right? Or you have to have multiple ships nearby to interact with these guys. So before they also benefited a lot from those smaller heroes as you mentioned. So I do really wonder what's it gonna be now, especially since you can't upgrade them to 15 anymore, or can't
Yeah,
double up on them. So
yeah.
yeah, that'll be interesting. They definitely took a hit, but I think rightfully so, because it was such a bad experience playing against these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know. We don't have that many units in KO, so
Yeah.
like down below is like the spearhead version of the Arcanaut Company unit, but that unit I wasn't expecting to be my bread and butter unit either.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the only other unit that we haven't seen, like of guys that come in multiples, is
The engine
the
riggers.
engine riggers,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine they're going to be radically different than what we see, kind of what they did with Sky Wardens in terms of changing their profile from before. So, um, you know, it's going to depend on what the heroes are doing. We don't have a code, I guess, to be like changing these guys' stats or the way they function.
Well,
The form
maybe the co-write brings an ability where you can choose how your army fights, right?
that would be cool. That would give him a lot more of a kind of must take
Mm-hmm.
vibe than before. And he's not going to interact with heroic actions because those don't exist anymore.
Yeah, and who knows what
Um,
your other formations are?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, could be. I'm just kind of feeling like the army. I don't know where its main punch is coming from. It's obviously mobile in a certain sense, as long as the price is cheap enough on the sky vessels to be able to take enough of your units with it.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, I don't know if the punch is there anymore. It really depends on how the synergistic units work.
Yeah,
Um,
the thing
so
is that most of the games that I've played against KO are against my regular opponent, who always brought one vessel with 10 thunderers and some heroes, and then 6 of the Sky Wardens and some heroes. And that was such a I think you played a similar list against me at some point, because I really love that idea of having the shooty and the melee components of that army into
yeah,
one list, and then you really felt like you were engaging in all fronts. While when you were fighting the full Thunderer build, it was just so boring. You either got them and you won, or you didn't and you lost. So I do really think that you can't bank on either one of those units anymore. As you mentioned, you really need a combination. You might actually need a combination of ships as well to carry your smaller heroes alongside of these bigger units or something like that. Maybe you would need the smaller boats to carry some small heroes to accompany your Thunderers next to the other ones that are already in the ship. I don't know. I do think you're going to be forced to mix and match more than you were before. But that's the whole direction that they're going for with the 4th edition indexes so far, right?
yeah. I'm with you. I just don't know what's doing the punching because
Yeah,
I
fair.
don't think this unit's gonna cut it like they quite like they
Yeah.
used to. You know.
It'll
So
really depend on the buffs that they're going to be able to receive from our heroes.
yeah, I mean we've evidently seen all the artifacts. So then it's coming down to heroic traits, I guess I should say, and then maybe the faction things,
Yeah,
the
and the
formations.
hero war scrolls.
Sure, the buffs that are built
Mm-hmm,
in. So I
mm-hmm.
mean, there's a lot left to be seen, guys. But at the same time, I can understand if KO players are left a little bit like with their hands up in the air, like
Oh,
what are
for
we?
sure.
How's this work now? I mean, like I actually think the movement stuff's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, although it's just a kind of expanded version of what we had with Grunstock Expeditionary Force. But I don't think it's actually that bad of a change at all. It's more this stuff that I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, well we don't have to look at the Arco
No,
War Scroll really.
let's.
Okay, so I mean it there's little things that have changed, and as you know, looking at these scrolls is not really necessarily
Yeah.
indicative of what we're going to see. Um, basically, they're still getting their plus on this war scroll. They're getting +1 to hit rolls, targeting a unit that's contesting objective, but that was always their ability.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, in Spearhead, they're split into 2 different groups.
Oh
One
yeah.
with four Arcanauts and a Privaster, sorry, and a guy with a Sky Pike, and then you've got
Mm.
3 with, I guess, the regular stuff, and then the 2 heavies. Kind of interesting that they did that. I can't imagine that that's what they're doing in the full game.
No.
Um, that would be interesting if you could choose one or the other
If you
build.
could bring these guys in units of 5 and they would cost like 60 or 80 points, that would be so cool.
It'd be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just don't see them doing it. I think they
No.
did it mainly just to split things
Yeah,
up.
for sure.
Um, let me see. Is there anything that's really important? Oh, maybe it's something I didn't mention about the Thunderers, but worth pointing out here is that if I'm not mistaken, having a champion in the unit only gives, even if they're a mainly shooting unit, only gives the champion +1 attack on their melee weapon,
Yeah.
which really nerfs some shooting units that really could use that extra 1 elite attack. So this probably does still have a champion in it, but it's just going to be buffing his like crappy melee weapon, which is weird. I don't know why GW went that way. I wish they they could have said if he has a missile profile, then it buffs that, or it buffs both. I don't
Both,
think it
yeah.
would have been that
Yeah.
crazy to do that. And evidently these guys with their pistols are shooting in combat, so they're objective sitters, and then maybe that gives them a little bit of a extra thing here. If I'm not mistaken, the Sky Pike got a little bit worse. Let's see, am I right about that? Yeah, it lost an attack. So that's kind of, but it does crit mortals, at least on this version of the
Yeah.
War Scroll. So that maybe makes up for it. It's very similar to what we see the Sky Pikes, if not identical to what we see with
It's
them
identical,
on.
yeah.
And then the Arcanaut Cutters got +1 attack, so the basic guys in combat are hitting twice as much. But with that 4s and 4s human profile, you're not really writing home about it. So that's kind of what's going on with the guys. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think these changes are for the better of the game. I think as an opponent, you'll have a much more enjoyable experience because it's just clear what's happening, right? You can at least see what units are in what boats. There's no shenanigans. There's no asking who's in what. You can actually see the models. You can interact with them. It's more visual, and I really, I'm a very visually focused player, so I really need to absorb whatever is happening in front of me. And it was hard for me to just gauge the strength of the army based on 2 boats and maybe a small unit in the back. So I think overall for the opponents, it's gotten way better. For the KO players themselves, I do think that most of them will feel like this is a nerf, especially if you were more into the tournament scene. As you mentioned yourself, Ryan, it's not very clear where the killy aspect of the army is gonna come in. You're still very damagey, but is it enough to really delete units?
Right.
We'll have to see about that with the other war scrolls when they can sort of interact with one another more. But overall, I'm feeling positive. I really love the changes to the movement, even though it's going to take much longer to set things up now and move things about. I think at first that you might think it's a nerf, but when you keep thinking about it, there's so many possibilities that this opens up to. And if you're a tactical person, you're going to enjoy this more than before, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you mentioned the one thing I maybe would push back on is you said there's no movement shenanigans or whatever. What you see is what you get for the opponent. And the one thing that might be actually kind of complicated is exactly what happened earlier when we were discussing all the technical rules
Yeah.
trickery that you can do with picking people out of combat, which feels
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but
that's
that's still all written in that one ability. So if you read that ability as an opponent, you're like, okay, I misread that. Sure, that happens. But now, as it is now, there's so many abilities that let you do different movements things. That I'm like, okay, so you should have told me about that ability and that ability and that ability as well. And I always feel like teleporting feels worse than moving about a lot. So, but that's maybe just me.
Sure. I mean, the army literally, as far as we can see, can't teleport anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless you count guys being picked up in the boat, but the boats can't teleport
Yeah.
anymore. So, anyway, I'm not down on it. Curious to see what the rest is. And a lot of people hate playing against this army, and I totally get it. So if it makes the army yet another step in the right direction towards not just being a shoot, a 40K army, and it makes them have to get closer up and be more vulnerable, not in the boat and protected, and not Death Starry, then good for the game. Good for good for them.
The fact that you're probably gonna have to mix and match your different kind of units, I think is gonna feel much better for both you and your opponents in the long term.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, I guess we can close out there. Thanks again, guys, for keeping up with all these faction focuses. Tomorrow is Zinch, which is another one of my armies, and
Hmm.
another army that Jonas plays against often. So,
Yes.
I think we're both excited to see what that says for different reasons. I don't know if we'll have time to do one tomorrow. Maybe it'll be me and my by myself, but I'd like to try to keep these up as much as we can every day, guys. So thank you so much for the positivity. Feel free to share the video in the right Facebook and other groups, the WhatsApp chats around the world. That really goes a long way. We really appreciate it. Jonas, you want to say anything else before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, I'm good. Guys, try to stay positive if you're super disappointed by this and you were full on Thunder build. Um, don't judge too hastily. You know, don't be the dwarf that you might be. Give it a
Yeah,
while. Wait until you see the full thing.
right. All right, guys. Well, on that note, until next time, Ryan and Jonas out.